At sunrise, a small band faces a problem every modern household would recognize. Moving day. Except there are no boxes. No truck. No storage unit. No spare room where useless things can wait for years. A woman looks at what lies near the fire: a hide sling, a digging stick, a flint core, and a sleeping child. The test is simple. Can this be carried all day? That single fact changes the meaning of wealth. In a house, possessions can look like security. On foot, possessions become weight. Keep too little and you may be exposed. Keep too much and you slow the group that keeps you alive. So when we look at ancient foragers and see few things, we should be careful. We may not be seeing failure. We may be seeing a different economic problem. The question is not whether they had supermarkets, hospitals, written laws, or permanent roofs. They did not. The sharper question is whether our definition of poverty makes sense for people whose main capital was carried in memory, skill, bodies, and relationships. Modern people usually measure wealth by accumulation. How much food is stored? How many tools are owned? How secure the house is? How much labor can be bought from strangers? By that standard, foragers look poor almost immediately. They had no full pantry. No bank account. No city infrastructure. No emergency department beyond the ridge. But that standard smuggles in a modern assumption that a good life is built by making the world sit still. Foragers solved a different problem. They had to survive in a world that moved. Seasons changed. Animals migrated. Plants ripened and disappeared. Water shifted. Strangers appeared. Weather made plans ridiculous. If your life depends on movement, permanent accumulation can become a trap. A heavy object is not just property. It is a tax paid by the knees, the back, and the people waiting for you to keep up. This is the first correction. Foragers were not simply modern people with empty cupboards. They were people organized around mobility. The second correction is about evidence. The deep past does not preserve ordinary life evenly. Stone survives. Bone survives. Burned material sometimes survives. Wood and fiber usually vanish. So do songs, jokes, arguments, and lessons. This matters because forager life was probably full of things archaeology is bad at preserving. The old phrase, stone-aged, can mislead us. It makes the world sound as if stone was the center of everything, when many useful tools were likely made from materials that decay. If future archaeologists judged modern teenagers only from a few surviving envelopes, they would badly misunderstand their lives. Ancient foragers have a similar problem. The record gives us fragments, then tempts us to mistake those fragments for the whole. Modern forager societies help, but they are not living fossils. Many were shaped by farmers, states, markets, or violence. The honest conclusion is diversity. There was no single forager lifestyle. Now return to the woman at the fire. If she leaves camp, she is not walking through generic nature. She is moving through a known landscape. A bend in a branch may matter. A track may show what animal passed and when. A plant can be food in one season and poison when handled badly. This is not mystical harmony with nature. It is expertise under pressure. A forager needed a working map of animals and plants, water and stone, weather and social risk. Tubers mattered. Smoke mattered. Tool edges mattered. So did silence. Modern knowledge is much larger in total. No small band could build a satellite or design antibiotics. But modern knowledge is distributed. A person can live safely because thousands of strangers know things for them. That is a triumph, but also a trade. The system becomes more competent while the individual can become less competent outside the system. A software engineer may know things no ancient person could imagine and still be unable to identify a safe meal beside a path. That is not a moral failure. It is specialization. This is one reason the word poor becomes unstable. A person can lack objects and still possess practical knowledge. The next comparison is work. The common story says agriculture and industry rescued people from desperate wandering. Sometimes they did. Modern medicine and stored food have saved lives on a scale no forager band could match. But farming also created new obligations. Fields do not follow you. Grain has to be guarded. Stores attract pests and rulers. A failed crop can make a whole village hungry because everyone has bet on the same few plants. Foraging had its own risks, but its work rhythm could be different. Food getting often rose and fell with opportunity. One day might require hours of walking and digging. Another might bring abundance. In some modern forager studies, the hours spent directly acquiring food are lower than many agricultural or industrial work weeks. That does not prove that all ancient foragers had easy lives. It proves something more useful: the work story is not simple. A person can work fewer scheduled hours and still face more danger. A person can be free from a boss and still be ruled by drought, fever, injury, or pressure inside a small group. Progress did not simply replace misery with comfort. It changed the kind of problems humans had to solve. There are good reasons to think some foragers ate well. A varied diet can protect people from the failure of one crop. Small mobile bands are also less friendly to the crowd diseases that later flourished in dense settlements. Some foragers may have avoided problems that became common after farming. But the romance ends quickly. High child mortality changes everything. A fever that is routine today could become fatal. A broken bone could decide the future. There was no ambulance. No antibiotics. No state strong enough to protect a vulnerable person from the group. Small band intimacy is not automatically kindness. If everyone knows you, there is warmth and help. There is also nowhere to disappear. Conflict can become total. A person who cannot move with the band can become a terrible practical problem. That is why both simple myths fail. The forager world was not a peaceful Eden. It was also not a permanent nightmare. It was human, intelligent, anxious, inventive, and sometimes brutal. One detail makes the old world feel less abstract. Before wheat changed human schedules, before sheep and cattle filled settlements, dogs had already entered human life. A dog was not a food machine. It was a companion, alarm system, hunting partner, and social presence around the fire. Some ancient burials placed dogs close to humans. We cannot prove what those graves meant emotionally, but the point is still useful: few possessions can make a life look thin from a distance. Up close, it may be crowded with bonds. Foragers probably did not experience the landscape as inert material waiting to be used. In many small-scale societies, animals and ancestors can have social force. Places can too. A hunter may owe respect to an animal. A sickness may be interpreted as a relationship gone wrong, not just a body malfunctioning. But this is where discipline matters. We do not know the exact stories ancient foragers told. A handprint on stone is not a caption. A burial is not a transcript. A painted animal is not a theology textbook. The safest claim is also the most interesting one. They had meaning systems powerful enough to organize labor, grief, and status, but most of those systems left almost no readable record. Consider rich Paleolithic burials with thousands of beads and worked objects placed around the dead. The exact explanation is uncertain. Rank, family, spirit, and mourning all remain possible. Someone invested enormous labor in symbols. Someone believed the treatment of a dead body mattered. That is not material wealth in the modern sense, but it is not emptiness. Violence gives the same lesson in caution. Some skeletal samples show little obvious evidence of human attack. Other sites show bodies with embedded points, repeated wounds, or signs of massacre. Neither side should be turned into a universal law. Ancient life varied by ecology, population density, food pressure, and culture. Some places may have been relatively peaceful for long periods. Others were dangerous. The record is too thin for a slogan. And that may be the deepest problem with the whole subject. Most forager history is gone. Not because nothing happened, but because the events did not leave the kinds of evidence we know how to read. There may have been alliances and scandals. Songs, healers, artists, and leaders. Almost all of it disappeared. Modern people often confuse permanence with importance. A stone building survives, so it looks historical. A song that changed a child's courage vanishes, so it looks like nothing. That is a mistake. A life can be consequential without becoming a monument. So were foragers rich or poor? If rich means a warehouse of goods, they were poor. If rich means protection from infection, injury, hunger, and violence, they were often poor by modern standards. But if wealth also includes competence, flexible time, and a world that a person can understand directly, the answer becomes less comfortable. Modern life did not simply add comfort to an empty past. It changed the balance sheet. It gave us medicine, stored food, safer berths, and strangers whose expertise keeps us alive. But it also made many of us dependent on systems we cannot repair and forms of work that separate the body from the world it lives in. The point is not to go back. It could be merciless. The point is to ask a better question. Not, were ancient people miserable because they owned little? But, what kinds of wealth become invisible when a society learns to count only objects, output, storage, and control? Foragers carried less than we do. That much is obvious. What is easier to miss is that they did not move through an empty world. They moved through a world dense with information, danger, memory, and consequence. And the final consequence is the one that changes the story again. People who owned little were still powerful. They moved into new landscapes. They used fire. They hunted animals that had never learned to fear them. They changed the living world before fields, cities, or machines existed. The first footprint could vanish in the tide. The second footprint would be harder to erase.